Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Hey, and welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. Zach Spencer here talking about immigration and citizenship with Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, talking about coming back and forth across the border. I had this misconception that both sides knew exactly what was going on at this instantaneously, but that's not the case. And then we have this added complication of what's called an ETA. Explain what that is.
So the electronic travel authorization that we talked about in a previous segment, one of the tools that is handed Canada Border Services is the ability to have a form that you filled in where you answered some questions. If those questions turn out to be false, you are now guilty potentially of misrepresentation under Section 40 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Your listeners may be horrified to find out that if Grandpa says no to I have a criminal record and he has a DUI and he's written that down on his electronic travel authorization, he's risking a 5-year ban from Canada, which is what a violation of Section 40 will get him. And the challenge now is that you've had this added to Canada Border Services toolkit. They don't have to prove that the offense is equivalent to a Canadian offense or very little else. They just have to prove that you lied on your form, which is often very easy. I mean, we found out you had a criminal record. Here's what you said on the form.
They don't jive.
And so that's added something. And why that matters to the discussion we're about to have is we're about to talk about Canadian immigration levels and how high they are. What your listeners have to also know is that we've never had higher numbers of people deported from Canada. Last year, we hit a record 21,500 removals from Canada. And to give you some context, when I started in this business in 1995, the number was something like 5,700. In 2000, that number was 7,200. Now we're talking about triple that number annually.
Why is that?
Well, for one thing, information sharing is better. And so they know more people are inadmissible. So it's easier to enforce the law than it used to be for reasons that I just said. Second, there was considerable effort and budget thrown into enforcement activities in the 2000s in the wake of 9/11 and then later during the course of the Conservative government's reign. And because certain permanent residents now don't have appeal rights the way they used to prior to 2002, it's easier to deport permanent residents than it was before. So you have a combination of laws that are more facilitated for removal. You also have greater information sharing and more resources thrown at removals.
And what is the bar to be removed? How high is it?
Depends on who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Depends on who you are.
If you're just here as a visitor, you're here on a work permit, and you've been convicted of an indictable offense, you're inadmissible to Canada unless a certain time period has passed and you're deemed rehabilitated. So, for example, a lot of American listeners are always shocked to find out that actually a DUI can make them inadmissible to Canada. So they're legally not allowed to travel, and they can't even apply for what's called rehabilitation for 5 years, right?
So if you're convicted, if you're a foreign national here on a study permit, and you are convicted of a DUI, that can get you deported from Canada and barred from reentering.
Yeah, and as a Canadian, and it's much different though. I mean, the bar is higher, for example, for permanent residents, right? But it's still actually due to some. I would say most of the bar would say most of the Canadian Bar Association find it very reprehensible the changes that the Conservatives brought in. That if you're convicted of an indictable offense. And you end up serving more than 6 months of incarceration as your sentence, then you're deportable without even an appeal.
Yeah, if you're a permanent resident.
So it creates a horrible circumstance where somebody can have been here for years, have a family here, come here. And I mean,
and this could have been something that was 50 years before.
It's unlikely, probably. It's unlikely if they've been living here that long that wasn't found out. I mean, the worst situations we see in our office are when people come here as young children, and they run into the wrong crowd, and then they're 18 or 19 and do something stupid, and then it's potential, and often they are actually deported back to a country where they have no family, they don't speak the language and don't plug in.
They've never been there.
Yeah, for a crime that, they get 6 months, which isn't federal time, like an incarcerated sentence. I mean, it's before the Supreme Court of Canada. That also, currently, the way the law is actually interpreted by the Immigration Appeal Division, includes house arrest, right? So
And conditional sentence orders.
Yeah.
So that's the action of moving people out of the country, but we have record numbers of people coming in, and there have been changes to this, right? The numbers.
Well, they have, and some of the numbers look like they've grown. Certainly, the plan for both 2016 and 17 appears to be showing that we're going to allow in well in excess of 300,000 legal immigrants to Canada in all categories. And what's interesting from the immigration levels, which are published annually, both the plan for the future of immigration as well as what's actually passed. These are reports that have to be tabled by the Minister of Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada to the government, and which are published, that give you an idea of both source countries for immigrants, what categories they're immigrating under, what the projections are. And, some of the interesting highlights here is that in 2015, we, and much like in 2016, the number one country is going to actually be the Philippines.
Yeah.
I've been hearing that's been number one for quite a few years.
Yes, that's right. I mean, Syria, you're going to see as pretty close to number one for 2016. But for 2015, the number one country was the Philippines and remains through 2016.
Why is that?
Well, the government went on a plan to basically clear its backlog of live-in caregivers and went on a campaign essentially to try to deal with all of the nannies that had earned the right to Canadian permanent residence but hadn't yet been processed, even though they'd applied for permanent residence. I'll let Rudy pick that point up.
It's a shocker when you explain to the average person sort of the hurdles that somebody under this program had to go through. So it's a category of what we call live-in caregivers. So people that are actually got a permit to actually live in somebody's home and have completed a requirement of living and working in that home, either taking care of their children or taking care of an older adult or somebody with health issues, and basically have worked there for 2 years. They then apply to be approved, and then the waiting time after that is almost another 5 years. So these people are away from their families, if they've got families and kids overseas, for sometimes over 7 years. And
I know nannies personally for over a decade, and they were without these. They left small children behind. Mothers away from their kids. It's got to be heart-wrenching to start with, and then for 7 years sometimes they reunited with their children. It's a terrible thing.
Well, it's heart-wrenching when they come to your office and they say, well, what can we do? I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but the government wait time, what they're saying, the average processing time is 5 years. So I know you've been waiting 4 years. You got to wait another year.
So are they trying to expedite this backlog, and that's why we're going to have a big spike of Filipino?
Yeah. So basically, they've done that. They've sped up the processing. So now that these are getting done, and they've also done something on the other end, is they've capped for the first time ever the amount of people that can apply under this program. So this is a problem I think we're going to see in other areas of immigration, is where we have people with lots of work permits here. Are they going to be able to find a pathway through immigrants? Because we've opened up the door to work permits, as we did with the living caregiver, but we never set a cap. The government, for the first time, has set a cap, and we'll see that take effect.
Well, I have to say, every time you come in, it's always interesting, and it's always moving. It's a moving target, immigration and citizenship. It's never dull, is it?
No, it keeps us hopping.
Absolutely.
And the Trump effect is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, who knows what it'll be next month?
It's an orange cake.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right, Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law. What's the easiest way to get in touch with you guys?
I would say if you go to our website, vancouverlaw.ca.
Vancouverlaw.ca.
Yeah.
Well played on the
Vancouverlaw.ca.
Well played on the website, too.
Yeah.
Well done. All right. That's all the time we have for The Law Show. I'm Zach Spencer. Thanks to our two guests. We'll speak to you next time on CL 650.